The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone. Welcome to webinar on Token Service Provider, an introduction to certification. I'm Vijay John, VP Security and Compliance from ControlCase. Thank you for your time to join our webinar for 20-30 minutes on what is TSP, its applicability, how to become TSP, and a quick run through on how payment token is used in real world, and finally certification. Few important points before we start. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to put your queries on the questions window and we'll address them during QA. If you have any audio or video issues, kindly put those in chat window and our moderator will address them as soon as they can. Copy your slides and recording of the webinar will be distributed next week. Note that our earlier webinars are available on the ControlCase portal. Future webinars will be posted as well. Please visit controlcase.com for more details. Now let's jump into the presentation of TSP. A quick agenda: what is tokenization provider means, how you can become a TSP, benefits of being TSP. We'll go through the business flows of payment, a scope, TSP requirements, high level, and assessment and certification. So what is the tokenization? The process which replaces sensitive authentication data or card data with surrogate values and still maintain the same business process in the payment ecosystem. So obviously it eliminates the risk process because basically it does not use the cardholder data, so definitely add a layer of protection in the payment system. And fraud exposure because cardholder data will be minimized within a closed environment, thereby the fraud is minimized. And most importantly, there are no major changes required to the payment system because existing system may continue to work as normal. Having said that, we need to know what different tokens we are talking about. There are mainly three types of tokens available. One is acquiring token. As we know, these are mainly used by the acquirers. They create these tokens for their own purposes within a closed loop. Used for authorization, mainly used for card on file system where online payment can be used for recurring payments, etc. Since it's a closed loop, it cannot be used for normal payment channels. Next is an issuer token. As we know, issuers may use their own tokens internally to reduce the scope. Again, this cannot be used as outside world since it is being used within a closed loop. So the third one is called payment tokens. What is payment tokens and what is the relevance here? The payment tokens are created by TSP, mainly the entities which are being certified with registration with EMVCo. So what is an EMVCo? Probably, you know, this EMVCo is mainly an introduction to all the 6 payment channels. Brands are together formed EMV channel. There are acquirers, merchants, as well as other stakeholders involved here. And it's in replacement of PAN. So it is all controlled by the EMVCo where the bins are issued and for payment token process going forward. The important stuff of this payment token is it complies with the normal PANs. And typically it's the 13 to 19 digits. And also it supports ISO 8583 messages. The reason being, it also needs to support backward compatibility, mainly because this kind of transactions may be used on the existing infrastructure where POS have been used. The current transfer of payment is done over, majority is done over 8583 messages. So there are no changes required, it still supports the same. So a typical payment token is how it looks like. You can see it is a very similar to PAN structure. It has a first bin, the card identifier, and the token identifier, and then random generator within and learn legit just to make sure the cards are verified properly. So this is a typical token as compared to a PAN. So what is a token service provider? So we are talking about tokens. We know it works within the environment. They are the providers which replaces the card data with the surrogate value. And mainly the surrogate values are called the acquiring payment tokens. So they create and manages the payment token. They internally generates the tokens on behalf of customers or their own purposes, but they are all mainly use payment tokens. And they're independent, can be independent payment parties like a service provider. They can generate their own payment tokens. However, as we said, they had to be registered with the EMV Co as we speak more. And it's also, there is an opportunity for them to be a part of the payment network, like such as an acquirer, for example, or an issuer. They can, a backend can be a TSP where they create their own tokens, which is again payment tokens and can be used. So we'll see what are the benefits coming up later in the slides. So let us look into a typical, how does a typical payment process works? And now the user obviously is a mobile device. He has an NFC enabled. This is typically called nowadays is a cloud payment processing. Now he taps on the POS initiated device, so NFC initiated POS, and the payment travels to the merchant. Merchant acquires it and passes on to the next level, which is acquirer. Acquirer sends to the network. Because since acquirer knows that this is a bin corresponding to a payment token, does not process it, it just forwards to network, which can be a group of payment, MasterCard, Visa, or whatever may be the case. Now they know that this bin corresponds to a payment token. It passes the information to the TSP, which is actually the issuer of this payment token. Now payment token is converted to the PAN by the TSP, sends back to the network. Now network knows based on the bin of the PAN, it sends to the issuing bank. Thereby it authorizes, processes, and decline or accepts it, sends back, way back to the acquirer, and sends back to the merchant. The important element here is, as you can see, the merchant and the acquirer does not know the element. This is purely token. It does not have any cardholder data involved. Only the network, which is of course the branch and TSP, and only the issuing bank know the actual value of PAN. This is actually the segregation where it is now the fraud is much reduced at the endpoint, does not know anything about the cardholder data. It need not process anything for the cardholder data. So there are a few steps to this, just wanted to cover. As you know, the NFC enabled device already has the token. So how did you get it in the first place? So there are some processes you need to conduct before in hand, such as a registration. This is how you receive the token from the TSP. So it can be an acquirer or a third party or a merchant even. They have the TSP validation. So the end user connects it and downloads the application to the mobile. There, the first time registration is the only time he may have to go forward with the registration process. This is where he would input the PAN, and definitely that PAN goes to the TSP provider. TSP captures this data, and now he validates the PAN. Typically, they send it to the issuer for authorization. And there are certain steps perhaps within the TSP to validate this thing that based on the business process and rule process, risk management, and so forth. Here, once that is done, there are additional steps they may undertake just to make sure the user validation, whether he is registered for the token and how many tokens he can be provided. There are multiple, one PAN can have multiple tokens as well. So how many days or expiry period, even hours, days or weeks, how much time it can retain within his wallet, and so on and so forth. So there are certain prerequisites or certain steps done before the token is being issued to the customer. The whole rule based is within the TSP as they build their TSP and business process as well. Now, who can be a TSP? Now we are talking about the TSP certification. So any provider within the ecosystem, it can be issuer, acquirer, merchants, anyone who wishes to be a TSP is possible, but there are certain steps or there are certain prerequisites they may have to do it. You will see that now they are the one who generate and issue payment tokens. They must be validated a PCI DSS entity. This is a typical PCI DSS certification process. They have to go through annual validation and all compliance requirement must be compliant with. And also they should be registered with EMV code. This is an important point. They have to have the steps taken further. Prior to any certification process, they have to approach the EMV code, register, require a request for an EMV code ID. Based on that ID, they can move forward for the next steps. We'll talk about that later. But this is a minimum requirement for any entity to be TSP certified entity. Now, why TSP and what are the benefits of being TSP? Obviously, it gives you a lot of internal help. It reduces the fraud management. Also, there are full control of tokenization process, meaning that they their own create, they manages it, they can have their own processes within the environment. They do undertake the full digital payment process. They can own it because now that's the way industry is moving. They can have full control of what they need to do within the payment system, ecosystem, as well as the new cloud payment processing coming up. And obviously the cost will be much reduced because you are within yourself. You don't have to pay for additional transactions. As we see, honest offers transactions are performed, but especially on the honest transactions, these are the within the loop. So which means that they are not paying anything, any extra charges for the payment transactions. And they also can protect their own privacy because they don't have to share this particular any calculated data value to anybody because they can their own internal systems since they share only the tokens. And they can build their own business processes or data warehouse where they can build critical value-based business processes internally. So what are the steps to become TSP? There are, as we said, anybody can, within the ecosystem, can comply with, be a TSP, but what are the requirements mainly they have to go through? So TSP is built based on an EMV Core payment tokenization specification technical framework. This is actually produced or rather published by the EMV Core. There are a lot of requirements within this requirement built on the PCI DSS. So bottom line, entity has to be PCI DSS. The next step, they have to get this TSP requirements. So TSP requirements are on top of PCI DSS taken from the EMV Core payment tokenization specification. This document is readily available on the website. You can refer that. Again, like a PCI DSS defines the physical and logical security requirements. It's typical like any PCI SSC assessment process. And again, development, the whole requirements are developed by PCI SSC and managed by brands, meaning that any queries going forward will be addressed by the brand. So if you have any questions regarding this, you can approach the brands and they will be the final word. And SSC will not be listing the brands, but the brands will have the list of TSP validated providers. Now, the core of TSP is something called TDE. So similar to CDE, we have something called TDE. TDE is the token data environment. The exact requirement as stipulated in the PCI DSS about CDE is also applicable here. So what is a TDE? How do we determine TDE? These are the systems where tokens generated and mapping process. Typically, these are done in something called token vault. So as you know, the token vault is probably the heart, probably where the tokens are stored. The implementation may differ, but here it's a high level how a typical TSP is maintained. And then there are application side of the tokenization process. These are the application APIs are mostly used. These APIs mostly internally developed, or they can also use brand based applications, which is readily available, or they can create their own application internally. And token vault also manages the life cycle. As we said, life cycle also means that a token, unlike PAN, has a life period, which means it may expire in hours or maybe days or weeks and so on and so forth. This is typically because of the business process within the TSP or the entity. And this is mainly done probably in the token vault. And also mapping and remapping, meaning how a PAN is being mapped to a token mapped to PAN, because first registration, as we see in it, PAN is mapped to token. And next, as we saw in the authorization process, they had to remap token, meaning the token comes in, they have to revert back to the PAN. So these are process mostly done by token vault, but use of the APIs. And this is one of the critical element of the whole TSP. This is called cryptographic function. The whole token has to be encrypted and stored within the environment. So the functions been typically done in an HSM. It's a requirement that all the cryptographic functions must be performed in an HSM, and also that is part of the TDE. And all the underlying technology, if anything else being done of any other supporting function which needs to be done on the token environment, it will be covered in the TDE. So the whole every environment or the whole TDE environment comprises of various elements, applications, databases, and stuff, systems. So let's see how a TDE, typical TDE, is implemented in an environment. There are various ways, but let's see two important, or rather most widely used. One is obviously the TDE, which sits as a subnet of CDE. As you can see, the CDE is of course that's a PCI certified entity. They will segment a TDE within the CDE. So all the PCI DSS controls will be applied to all the systems, plus the system within the segmented TDE needs to be manage or apply all the TDE controls. The rest of the network will be PCI, and this subset will be the TDE. The second approach is also possible for entities which are using new or small entities, where they create CDE as combined with TDE, meaning the same segment will be called as CDE TDE. The difference is here, the whole segment, which is a combination of TDE and CDE, all controls of PCI obviously, and TDE requirements need apply. Means that any system which are not performing any TDE functions also need to be part of the scope, since it is one big segment. So obviously the choice is the first option, where you segment TDE within CDE so that the scope is minimized and it's manageable, just like the PCI, we call it reduction of scope. So let's see how level on TSP requirements. There are 8 requirements which spread across 12 PCI DSS requirements. These are overlaps, or rather these are in addition to PCI requirements. We'll see as we move forward how these controls are mapped on various PCI DSS requirements. We will highlight the TSP requirements rather quickly. There are 8 requirements, as we said. These are mainly created on EMV core technical framework on top of the PCI DSS. The important point here is the TSP3, where protect and manage cryptographic keys. Here is where the encryption algorithm or key management function comes in. They have elaborate set of controls here, and they all need to be complied with. The next is requirement 6, which is similar to requirement 9 in PCI DSS. There are a lot of additional requirements needs to be done. Typical PCI DSS, you may see that it's a very secure environment in a data center, but a lot of additional requirements are required in a physical security aspects of TSP. This is a typical PCI TSP mapping, where each requirement is maintained against the PCI DSS. So here we have 12 controls as we see it, and again they are mapped to the PCI DSS. This is a slide just to demonstrate that they are mapped against the PCI. As you may see it also, that certain requirements are not covered in the TSP, but obviously the entity must be PCI DSS, so all the requirements needs to be covered. That is mandatory requirement. But certain requirements, like you can see 4 requirement, PCI DSS 4 or 5 is not part, because they are not part of the TSP, though they are part of PCI DSS. They all need to be maintained as well. So here, one of the key elements, as we discussed in the earlier slides, is the encryption process. So there are typical algorithms defined in the process, in the whole requirement. This is well defined, and entities must use the approved algorithm only, and maybe more, but these are the minimum requirements needs to be set within the TSP encryption process. As also we have seen earlier, the encryption process within the TSP must be performed by an HSM. This is a key element of TSP encryption process, key management function. The HSM must be FIPS 140-2 level 3 certified or PCI PTS HSM approved. These are the list provided. Those who are in the P2P environment knows what certification means. Those who are in the PCI DSS may have interface with this for a typical issuer or occurring part certification. But these are controls within the HSM needs to be complied with. And in the TSP encryption algorithm, all the key management processes need to be defined within the HSM, and they must be compliant with FIPS 140-2 level 3 or PCI PTS HSM approved. Going forward, we'll see the assessment and certification. The requirements are there. Now the entities are defined. Now the typical assessment must be done by P2P QSA. The reason being, one of the most of the requirement you are seeing is PCI DSS, but few elements are very crucial here. A TSP domain 3, as we have seen, is cryptographic functions, and which is very well defined and covered by P2P QSA. So it is more of a encryption or cryptographic functions. Need to understand how those are performed within the TSP environment. Therefore, this is very much important for assessment. Thereby, a P2P QSA is well versed with this technology and assessment processes. So it will be much easier to understand and validate the process. As we discussed earlier, any requirements, entities needs to be done. First of all, they had to be PCI DSS certified. All the controls, applicable controls, need to be applied, and this must have a valid PCI DSS certification. Now, you may see some difference here. The entity may have certified, but certain controls may not have validated as part of PCI. For example, development process. During the certification, entity may say that we don't have any internal development, so the PCI DSS may not cover requirement 6. However, moving forward, they decided to move with development of TSP, the application, as we have seen, APIs. Therefore, now requirement 6 now start to be in scope. In this scenario, during the assessment, requirement 6 can be done by the P2P QSA as part of the PCI assessment and issue a partial ROC, which is called red line ROC or partial ROC, and can be done along with the TSP certification process. And all applicable controls must be applied as we see in a PCI DSS environment. Similarly, there are no changes to this. However, compensating controls are applicable, meaning any, just like a PCI DSS, any applicable controls cannot be met for any reason, business or technical reason, then appropriate compensating controls can be applied. Here, one important point here, compensating control will be and managed by the brands, or rather you should discuss with the brands for appropriate controls. And finally, TSP ROC or TROC will be supplied as per the reporting template of PCI DSS. There are no difference to this as Council has issued. So it will be very similar to what you do for a PCI DSS certification process. And finally, this TROC and AROC, AOC, they called respectively for TSP certification, be sent to the brands. This can be done by the brand because there are additional certification process required going forward. Because once, as we have seen, the merchant needs TSP validation before they start their certification process going forward. So after this TSP, that does not mean that they can start doing it, but merchants, applicable brands may start their own certification process to validate TSP controls, and there obviously they need to see the TSP certification for any validation going forward. So that's the main of TSP controls. So why ControlCase for this matter? We have a global reach to over 40 countries. We have 400 plus as we speak. We have a large client base. We have already started doing TSP assessment as well. We have a lot of service certified resources within our company. We have PCI QSAs, PA QSAs, P2P QSAs. We have TSP QSAs as we are doing currently with the clients. And we are also 3DS QSAs for the market. We are also a certified ASV vendor. We can certify you for ASV scan process as well. So if you have any questions going forward regarding a TSP certification, please reach to us on any of the about channels. I can see you can talk to us over the phone, or you can talk to us over the portal, or send an email to our sales team. We'll be happy to get in touch with you. Now, next session is the QA session. So we have, I will check for the questions posted on the dashboard, as we can discuss some of the questions already posted there. Okay, so I have one question here. Can entity use third-party applications in TDE and become TSP compliant? Yes, all requirement as per PCI DSS requirement 6 will be applied. There are no additional requirements other than PCI DSS on application development. Since, as we've seen earlier, mapping, there are no additional requirements. The TSP does not have any application controls. However, all the application development internally done must be done based on requirement 6. That's mandatory requirements. So as we go through the processes, as we discussed earlier also, if the application development is not part of the PCI DSS certification, obviously the assessor will need to assess the requirement 6 and make sure the development process within the API development all are as per the requirement 6. And the other question we have is, it is mentioned that HSM must be used for all cryptographic functions. Is it possible to use key generation software tools or devices? We have seen how cryptographic functions are so important in the TSP domain, which are basically one of the core requirement domain. All the keys are approved algorithm must be used. So, which means that all cryptographic functions need to be done within an HSM as well. And this HSM needs to be certified as a FIPS 140-2 level 3 or PCI PTS HSM approved. Software tools cannot be used within the third-party environment. Meaning software is not a HSM, so they cannot use a software-only entity for cryptographic functions, as well as the third-party tools. There are additional tools available in the market. Now, some are very cheap products where keys can be generated, random numbers can be generated. These are various forms and various controls available. However, these are not, as long as they are not certified under FIPS 140-2 level 3 or PCI PTS HSM approved, they cannot be used. So that is very clear in the requirement. So any additional software, if you are using any additional HSM or additional functions you're using, make sure you have the HSM in place, which is an approved device. Okay, I have those questions only currently. I will wait for 2 more minutes just to see any other questions coming up. Please feel free to put your questions. I'll be happy to answer. Okay, thank you all. So it was a pleasure for having all in the webinar. As mentioned earlier, we will circulate the webinars to all participants. And thank you again for your participation. Thank you. Goodbye.